Welcome to episode 11 of The Evidence Room. Inside every investigation, the truth is hidden in the evidence. Tonight, we explore one of New York's most disturbing and complex serial murder investigations.
Yeah, and it's a genuinely unsettling deep dive today.
It really is. We're taking a look at the Gilgo Beach serial killings. And for those of you listening, this is a case that forces us to basically tear up the rule book on how we think predators operate.
Right, because for nearly 30 years, you had this killer who was just hiding in plain sight.
Exactly. I mean, back in 2010, the most dangerous place for a woman in New York wasn't, a dark alleyway. It was the digital anonymity of a prepaid burner phone.
And the craziest part is who was operating that phone? An architect. A guy just sitting at his drafting desk in Midtown Manhattan, projecting this completely flawless illusion of, like, a normal suburban dad.
Yeah, a meticulously constructed double life. But as we're going to see, it wasn't some dramatic, tearful confession that brought him down. It was overlapping data points and a discarded pizza crust.
Which is just incredible. It's really this profound case study of where forensic science meets abnormal psychology.
Right.
He used the sheer volume of the modern world to his advantage. Hiding his digital tracks in the crowded streets of Manhattan, exploiting marginalized women.
But the technology he used to build that firewall actually became the exact blueprint for his undoing.
Exactly.
So to really understand how this all unraveled, we have to start with the geography, right? Because the landscape hid the secret for a long time.
Oh, absolutely. Ocean Parkway on Long Island.
Yeah, picture it. On her south side, you've got the Atlantic Ocean. But on the north side, it's this incredibly dense, impenetrable thicket of marshland, scrub pine, poison ivy.
It's the kind of terrain that actively fights back if you try to walk through it.
Right. And on May 1st, 2010, a 24-year-old woman named Shannon Gilbert finds herself running for her life into that exact darkness.
Just a terrifying situation.
Yeah.
Shanann was working as an online escort, and she'd been driven out to a client's house in Oak Beach, which is this very isolated, gated community. And at 4:51 in the morning, something just goes terribly wrong. She calls 911, and she is in a state of absolute visceral terror.
Yeah, the audio from that call is just harrowing.
It is. For over 20 minutes, she's screaming that they're trying to kill her. She flees the house, bangs on a neighbor's door, and then just vanishes into that unforgiving brush.
Which sets off this massive, frantic search. Local police are out there for months combing this desolate stretch of highway, just looking for any trace of her.
Right.
But then we fast forward to December 2010. An officer and his canine, Blue, are doing a routine training exercise near Gilgo Beach.
So down the road from Oak Beach.
Exactly. And Blue hits on a scent deep in the bramble. They uncover human remains. But the shock here is it isn't Shanann Gilbert.
No. And within days, investigators uncover this horrific reality. They find 3 more sets of remains in that exact same localized stretch of brush.
4 women in total.
4 women, all placed roughly equidistant from one another, all bound, and all meticulously wrapped in burlap sacks.
Which is just chilling, and there's this terrifying irony that you really can't shake. If Shanann hadn't disappeared in that specific area, triggering that massive search grid...
They wouldn't have found them.
Right. Those 4 women might still be buried out there right now. I mean, nobody was looking for them on that particular stretch of highway.
And from a behavioral analysis standpoint, finding a clustered site like that, it's a massive intelligence dump.
A dumping ground, basically.
Well, we call it a dumping ground, but that's almost misleading.
Really? How so?
Because dumping implies a panicked disposal, like getting rid of evidence quickly. This wasn't panic. This was a curated cemetery.
Wow.
Yeah. When a predator takes the immense risk of returning to the exact same location time and time again, it shows supreme confidence. He felt he had absolute territorial control over that strip of road.
That makes total sense. And that brings us to the victims themselves, which, as we know, is crucial to understanding the killer's pathology.
Right, the Gilgo 4.
Yeah. Maureen Brainerd Barnes, Melissa Barthelemy, Megan Waterman, and Amberlynn Costello. And when you look at these women, you realize this wasn't random at all. He had a very specific type.
Exactly. Physically, they were strikingly similar. Petite women, mostly 5 feet tall or under, around 100 pounds, all in their 20s.
But the operational link was their work.
Right. All 4 were working as escorts, advertising independently on Craigslist. The killer knew what he was doing. He targeted sex workers because he was preying on a population that is often marginalized, highly mobile, and frankly, historically underserved by the justice system.
Yeah, and we really have to pause and look at who these women actually were versus how this monster viewed them.
Absolutely.
Because to him, they were disposable. But Maureen Brainerd Barnes was a single mother from Connecticut. She had actually left sex work, but she got an eviction notice and just needed to cover her mortgage.
Just trying to survive.
Right. And Amberlynn Costello had survived severe abuse starting when she was 6 years old. These were human beings fighting to make it in a really difficult world. And he weaponized their vulnerabilities against them.
He did. And he exploited that vulnerability through this incredibly rigid operational security. I mean, this wasn't a guy who just picked up his home phone to call a victim.
No, he was way ahead of the curve on digital traceability.
Exactly. He exclusively used prepaid burner phones. He'd walk into a store, pay cash, activate the device far away from his house, use it solely to set up a meeting with one specific victim, and then boom, the phone goes permanently dark.
He was basically a ghost. He never let his personal digital life cross with his criminal life.
Completely compartmentalized.
See, this is where the narrative totally fractures for me. You have this hyper-meticulous guy scrubbing his footprint, burying bodies where nobody goes. But then, after Melissa Barthélemy disappears in 2009, he uses her own phone to call her 15-year-old sister, Amanda.
Yeah, over 5 weeks.
Right. Over 5 weeks, he makes these incredibly vulgar, mocking phone calls. He literally tells a teenager that he murdered her sister and is going to watch her rot.
It's horrific.
But from a logical standpoint, why? Why would a guy so obsessed with burner phones and security take the massive existential risk of staying on the line with the victim's family?
It's a brilliant question, and it really points straight to the sadistic contradiction in his psychology. You have to remember, for a serial predator, the murder is often just one phase.
The power trip.
Exactly. The core driver is power and control. When investigators traced those taunting calls to Amanda, they didn't ping to some dark, isolated basement.
No, they pinged to incredibly crowded places.
Right, Madison Square Garden in Midtown Manhattan, the busy commercial hub of Massapequa on Long Island.
He's literally standing in a crowd of thousands of people, hiding in plain sight.
He's surrounded by the bustle of everyday life, holding a dead woman's phone and inflicting unimaginable psychological torture on her teenage sister.
Unbelievable.
That risk wasn't a lapse in security. The risk was the point. It gave him an intoxicating rush. He felt like he was playing God right under the police's noses, proving he was smarter than everyone else.
And the deeply frustrating part of this whole deep dive is that, for over a decade, he was right.
Unfortunately, yes.
Which brings us to the bureaucratic nightmare of this case. Because you have the killer's voice on tape, you have cell tower pings pointing to Midtown and Massapequa. How does a case with that much hard data just go completely cold?
It was a catastrophic systemic failure, primarily driven by what we call the silo effect in law enforcement.
Right, everyone guarding their own turf?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Local police departments fiercely guarding their jurisdictions and just refusing to share data. The most glaring example was former Suffolk County Police Chief James Burke.
Oh man, Burke!
Yeah. For years, Burke actively, deliberately walled off the investigation. He blocked the FBI from bringing their resources to Gilgo Beach.
And just to add some context for you listening, to understand how toxic that leadership was, Chief Burke later went to federal prison himself for civil rights violations and obstruction of justice in a totally unrelated case.
Yeah, the corruption was deep.
But the damage to the Gilgo investigation was already done. By locking out the FBI, local police lost access to advanced behavioral profiling and sophisticated digital mapping that local precincts just don't have.
It crippled the momentum entirely. And then you have the controversial handling of Shanann Gilbert's death.
Which is still so frustrating.
Despite her terrified 911 call, local police ultimately ruled her death an accidental drowning. They said she succumbed to the elements in the marsh. They basically just closed that avenue of investigation.
Even though an independent secondary autopsy later found damage to her hyoid bone. And just to be clear about the anatomy here, the hyoid is this tiny, fragile, U-shaped bone at the base of the tongue tucked behind the jaw.
Right.
You do not break your hyoid bone by slipping into a muddy marsh.
No, you don't.
It typically fractures under highly localized, intense compression. It is a classic, undeniable red flag for manual strangulation. The willful blindness there is just staggering.
It really is. And while they're fighting over jurisdiction and ruling deaths accidental, the scope of the horror is quietly expanding.
Yeah, let's talk about the spring of 2011. Because as search teams fan out further east and west along Ocean Parkway, the reality becomes exponentially worse.
They uncover 6 more sets of remains.
6. I mean, you have to imagine being a resident there. This community suddenly realizes they aren't dealing with a recent spree. They're dealing with a predator operating in their backyard since the early 1990s.
Right, waking up and reading the paper, realizing the guy you waved to at the grocery store might be a serial killer.
The timeline explosion is wild. They find the partial remains of Jessica Taylor and Valerie Mack. But what stands out to me is the condition of those bodies.
The dismemberment.
Yes. Both of those women had been dismembered, with parts left in the woods of Manorville years earlier. They also found Asian doe, a biological male wearing women's clothing, and the skull of Karen Vergata, whose legs were found on Fire Island back in 1996.
And that timeline reveals a really critical evolution in the killer's methodology.
How so?
Well, serial predators aren't static. They learn, they adapt. If you look at his early crimes, like Sandra Castile in 1993 and later Valerie Mack, he was dismembering victims and scattering them in the woods.
Right. But by the time we get to the Gilgo 4 between 2007 and 2010, he's just binding them with belts and wrapping them cleanly in burlap.
Exactly.
That doesn't sound to me like a killer losing his grip. That sounds like a guy optimizing his workflow.
That's an incredibly astute way to frame it. Dismemberment is chaotic. It's bloody, it requires tools, creates a massive biological mess, and you have to spend a dangerous amount of time with the remains.
Right.
Over the decades, he realized that binding them and using burlap was cleaner, transportable, and just far more efficient. He had perfected his system.
He thought his system was perfect because, well, it worked flawlessly in 2010, but he completely failed to realize that while his method stayed the same, forensic technology spent the next 12 years evolving at lightning speed.
Oh, absolutely.
Which brings us to the massive breakthrough. It takes until February 2022. A new police commissioner and a new DA take over. They finally establish a multi-agency task force that includes the FBI from day one.
Violate.
And they start looking at old case files with new eyes.
And, you know, in cold cases, the answer is almost always sitting right there in the original file, just waiting for the technology to catch up.
Yes, the Dave Schaller tip.
Exactly. Investigators homed in on an overlooked tip from Dave Schaller, who was Amber Costello's roommate. Amber was the last of the Gilgo 4 to disappear. Schaller described this client who was aggressively pursuing Amber. He said the guy looked like a large ogre, but critically, he remembered the vehicle, a first-generation dark green Chevrolet Avalanche.
Okay, but having the make and model is great, but a dark green Chevy Avalanche in the New York metropolitan area, that is a massive needle in an impossibly large haystack.
Right, so how do you narrow it down? You force the physical evidence to intersect with the digital evidence.
The cell tower data.
Exactly.
Right.
The FBI brought in specialized units to map what they called the box. Because even when you aren't making a call, your phone is constantly handshaking with the nearest tower.
Right, so they go back to the raw historical data from the burner phones, and the phone used to taunt Amanda.
And it's basically like triangulation.
Yeah, it's like a Venn diagram.
Right.
If one cell tower says the phone is in this 3-mile radius and another tower says it's in this other radius, the only place the phone can physically be is that sliver where the circles overlap.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And by analyzing those overlapping fences over months of data, they noticed an undeniable pattern. The phones consistently pinged in a very tight radius in Massapequa Park and a specific zone in Midtown Manhattan.
So let's lay out that Venn diagram for everyone listening. Circle 1. Geographical data pinpointing Massapequa Park in Midtown. Circle 2. The New York State Motor Vehicle Registry for a dark green Chevy Avalanche. Circle 3. The physical description of a very large, imposing man.
And when you lay those 3 filters over the entire population of New York, the overlapping center points to exactly one name.
Rex Hoyerman.
Rex Hoyerman, a 59-year-old architectural consultant, lived in Massapequa Park, commuted to his firm in Midtown Manhattan, and sitting right in his driveway was a dark green Avalanche registered in his name.
Boom. It's like suddenly using a metal detector on that haystack.
Exactly. But once his name was on the whiteboard, it initiated this incredibly tense cat-and-mouse game.
They had to tail him.
Around the clock. Undercover teams watching his daily routines. They even watched him walk into a Manhattan store to buy more minutes for a new burner phone.
Wow, so he was still actively engaging in preparatory behaviors.
Yes. But to make an arrest that holds up in court, they needed definitive biological proof tying him to the burlap sacks on Gilgo Beach.
And this is where the mundane reality of life catches up with a criminal mastermind. They needed his DNA, but obviously they couldn't just knock on his door and ask for a swab.
Right. That would tip them off.
So they just wait. And one afternoon in Manhattan, Hoyerman finishes eating a slice of pizza and tosses the leftover crust into a public trash can.
And detectives immediately swoop in. They retrieve the crust and send it to the lab.
It's amazing.
The science is fascinating. When you eat, epithelial cells from your cheek naturally slough off and stick to the food. The lab extracted a pristine sample of Hoyerman's nuclear DNA from the saliva on that dough.
And they ran it against a microscopic male hair recovered from the burlap sack used to wrap Megan Waterman back in 2010.
It was a perfect match.
It's just wild. That detail fundamentally alters how we view his perceived brilliance. I mean, you have a man whose entire identity as an architect is built on structure, blueprints, managing variables. He was so paranoid he used burner emails just to search for updates on his own investigation. And his 30-year reign of perfect operational security is brought to a screeching halt by his own biological litter.
It's incredible. He was arrested in July 2023. And that arrest just shattered the illusion he had built.
The house in Massapequa Park.
Yes. When they executed the search warrant, the facade of the mundane suburban father completely dissolved. The property was remarkably dilapidated compared to the neighbors.
Yeah.
Inside, police found a massive cache of hundreds of firearms. But the most disturbing discovery was hidden in the basement, a heavily fortified, soundproof, vault-like room.
Which is just chilling. And that discovery brings us to the present day, April 2026, because the sheer volume of horror is still pouring out.
Right.
On April 8th, Hoyerman stands in a Riverhead courtroom and officially pleads guilty to 7 murders. He also admits to an 8th Karen Vergata, the woman dismembered on Fire Island.
The courtroom proceedings provided some legal closure, but, a recent documentary series revealed something that gives a terrifying window into his pathology.
Yeah, the conversation with his ex-wife.
Exactly. Asa Ellerup, who filed for divorce immediately after his arrest, visited him in jail. She explicitly asked how many women he killed, and he confessed to the 8. But the truly chilling part was his admission of where.
He told her that he killed these women in the basement of their family home. He orchestrated these murders specifically during the windows of time when Asa and their children were out of state on vacation.
It's unfathomable.
It really is. It changes how we view his pathology. It's one thing to have a remote dumping ground in the marsh. It is another entirely to bring that extreme violence into the exact same physical space where your children sleep.
Psychologists call it extreme compartmentalization, but honestly, that term feels inadequate.
Yeah, it does.
The family home is meant to be a sanctuary. To violate that environment requires a level of psychopathy that allows a person to build an impenetrable firewall in their own mind. He was living 2 entirely contradictory lives, separated only by the lock on a basement door.
You really have to try and comprehend the reality his family is waking up to right now, to discover that the man making breakfast in your kitchen was turning your basement into a slaughterhouse the moment you left town.
Horrific. Asa Ellerup has had to publicly beg for privacy just to navigate the betrayal and the media circus.
But even with these 8 confessions, the map of this nightmare is nowhere near complete.
Not at all. There are glaring questions regarding the remaining unidentified victims on Ocean Parkway. We still don't know who is responsible for Asian Doe.
Right, and even though a separate suspect, Andrew Dykes, was just arrested for the Peaches and Baby Doe murders, it still leaves a massive chronological gap in Hoyerman's timeline.
A huge gap.
His confirmed killing spree started in 1993 and ended with Amber Costello in 2010. That's 17 years of active predation. But what about the 13 years between 2010 and his arrest in 2023?
Right. He owned properties in South Carolina, Las Vegas. It defies logic to think he simply stopped. Serial predators almost never stop voluntarily.
No.
The drive only ceases when they die, go to prison, or physically age out. The gap between 2010 and 2023 is a massive red flag. Law enforcement in every jurisdiction he ever visited are pulling their cold case files right now.
They have to be.
This investigation will be unearthing new leads for decades.
It's overwhelming. And as we look at the immense scale of this deep dive, we really have to ground the story back in the human cost.
Yes, absolutely.
Because it's easy to get swept up in the mechanics, the intersecting cell towers, the DNA, the stakeouts. But this isn't just an architectural puzzle, it's about a gaping void left behind.
It's a tragedy defined by multi-generational impact. Consider Megan Waterman's daughter, Liliana. She's just 3 years old when her mother vanished from a motel room. She's had to grow up navigating the world without ever being able to look her mother in the eyes and say, "I love you."
Yeah.
The collateral damage stretches so far beyond those graves on Gilgo Beach.
It does. Rex Hoyerman played his role to absolute perfection. He targeted vulnerable women because he did the callous calculation that society wouldn't care enough to come looking for them.
He thought they were invisible.
He really did. But the families of these victims proved him completely wrong. They never stopped fighting. They gave relentless media interviews, challenged police narratives, and demanded answers when the bureaucracy just wanted them to go away.
And that resilience is the enduring legacy here. On June 17, 2026, Rex Harmon faces multiple life sentences, officially ending a 30-year nightmare for Long Island.
But the specter of Shanann Gilbert's disputed death remains unresolved.
It does, and forensic teams are still fighting to identify the remaining victims.
Right. Rex Harmon drafted his crimes like architectural blueprints. He measured the risks, built digital firewalls, and operated under the certainty that he could control every variable.
But you can never truly sanitize a life of its darkest corners.
Exactly. As genetic genealogy and cell data mapping advance, the physical evidence left behind becomes a ticking clock that killers simply cannot outrun.
Yeah.
No matter how perfect a plan was in 1996, it is entirely vulnerable to the technology of today, which really makes you wonder, how many other suburban dads are currently sitting in their living rooms, sweating, just waiting for a knock on the door as technology finally catches up to their pasts?
It's a chilling thought.
Thanks for listening to The Evidence Room. If you enjoyed this episode, like and subscribe for more true crime investigations from around the world. Remember, some cases remain unsolved, but the evidence always tells the story.